So we're going to be looking at Acts 9 this morning, continuing with our series through Acts. Just as we have a little reminder, a couple of 3 weeks ago we did Acts 7, and we saw that was Stephen's speech to the Sanhedrin, and then his stoning. And then 2 weeks ago Jim spoke on Acts 8, which tells us that how after that a great persecution broke out and sort of spread the church out, and it started to grow after that. So that takes us to Acts 9, which I'll just read now. So, well, not all of it. I'll start in verse 1 and go to 20 something, I think. Meanwhile, Saul was still breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples. He went to the high priest and asked for letters to the synagogues in Damascus, so that if he found any there who belonged to the way, whether men or women, he might take them as prisoners to Jerusalem. As he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him, and he fell to the ground and heard a voice say to him, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" "Who are you, Lord?" Saul asked. "I am Jesus, who you are persecuting," he replied. "Now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do." The men travelling with Saul stood there speechless. They heard the sound, but did not see anyone. Saul got up from the ground, but when he opened his eyes, he could see nothing. So they led him by the hand into Damascus. For 3 days he was blind and did not eat or drink anything. In Damascus there was a disciple named Ananias. The Lord called to him in a vision. "Ananias." "Yes, Lord," he answered. The Lord told him, "Go to the house of Judas on Straight Street and ask for a man from Tarshish named Saul, for he is praying. In a vision he has seen a man named Ananias come and place his hands on him and restore his sight." "Lord," Ananias answered, "I have heard many reports about this man, and all the harm he has done to your holy people in Jerusalem, and he has come here with authority from the chief priests to arrest all those who call on your name." But the Lord said to Ananias, "Go. This man is my chosen instrument to proclaim my name to the Gentiles and their kings and to all the people of Israel. I will show him how much he must suffer for my name." Then Ananias went to the house and entered it. Placing his hands on Saul, he said to him, "Brother Saul, the Lord Jesus, who appeared to you on the road as you were coming here, has sent me so that you may see again and be filled with the Holy Spirit." Immediately something like scales fell from Saul's eyes, and he could see again. He got up and was baptized, and after taking food, he regained his strength. Saul spent several days in Damascus. At once he began to preach in the synagogues that Jesus was the Son of God, and all those who heard him were astonished and asked, "Isn't this the man who raised havoc in Jerusalem among those who call on his name? And hasn't he come here to take them off as prisoners to the chief priests?" Yet Saul grew more and more powerful and baffled the Jews living in Damascus by proving Jesus is the Messiah. So the first point that I want to make this morning is that at the start of the chapter we see that Saul is a man on a mission. He has one aim in his life, one thing that he's living for, and it's his hatred of the church, how he wants to destroy the church. It's his lifeblood, it's what's running through his veins. We read that he's breathing out murderous threats. It's this mission, it was the air he breathed, it was the oxygen, it was all consuming, it was what he needed to live. And there were no empty threats. We saw that he was there at the stoning of Stephen. He was holding the coats of the people so they could sort of, if they weren't lumbered with the coats, they could probably get on with the stoning more efficiently. And now we had these letters to go and arrest anyone that was calling on Jesus' name, men or women. So I guess all this sort of, the seriousness of this man, it serves to make his conversion all the more amazing, but it also just serves to show us how amazing the grace of God is, really, that he can save someone who is so resistant to him. And perhaps you've somehow somehow ended up here this morning and you feel like you're maybe resisting God, or you can look back at a time when you have been, but I imagine that in reality, not many of us here have ever been actively trying to destroy the church, but rather we've had a time when we weren't following Christ. We might say we were a bit neutral towards him. We didn't care for him. We didn't care against him. It was just we were in the middle ground, you might say. But in reality, there isn't a neutral position on this. If you're not living for Jesus, then you are against him. And what happens if you're not living for Jesus? Well, you'll be living for something else. And oftentimes, that something else is yourself. It's your success and your happiness. And the problem is that we're not designed to live like that. So if you think of Adam and Eve, they sort of had one thing that they'd been told they weren't allowed to do. They were told that they weren't allowed to eat from this fruit, from this tree. But that was God's design for them. They could do what they wanted, they just couldn't eat from this tree. I mean, surely it wasn't too bad, but that's what they did. They broke God's rule, and that's how sin and death entered the world. Or another example is Peter, maybe even more stark. On one occasion, this is just after he's admitted that Christ is the Messiah, he says, where he tried to stop Jesus going to the cross. He wasn't breathing out murder. He wasn't trying to destroy the church, but he was supporting Jesus. He simply doesn't want him to suffer, which is probably quite reasonable, you might think. But what does Jesus say in return? Get behind me, Satan. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. Therefore, we can see that to have in mind human concerns and not the concerns of God is to revolt against God. So, what about you? What are you breathing out? What are you devoted to? Is it to God or is it to something else? Perhaps a job, a car, a family life, a hobby, a football team, a relationship, breeding the best animals, I don't know, whatever it is. But what are the things that are in your life that you're putting ahead of God? What have you got on your mind that should be in God, that's in the place of God? And I know these things aren't as bad as what Saul was living for. But if they're not God, they're not the right things. And you may have said when I asked that you are living for God, that he is what you are breathing out, but I'd urge you to be careful there. Like, it's easy to deceive ourselves, isn't it? We're all masters of it. But does your time or your money, how you're spending them things, do they say that you're living for God? Or what if we brought one of your neighbours in, or someone that you work with? Would they say that you're living for God completely? Would they know what that looks like? So Saul was a man on a mission. So what's your mission? And then as we went down the passage a bit, sort of towards verse 5, we see that Saul was a man shaken to the core. So if you'd never read this passage before, but you were just sort of reading through the book of Acts for the first time, and you get down to verse 3, where it says that the light flashes around Saul, and we've just read how he's on his way to destroy the early church, and you've still got in the back of your mind about Ananias and Sapphira, who were struck down for lying about how much they sold the land for. And you think, oh, well, this is probably going to be a short story then. A great light flashed around him, he struck down, fell to the floor, and that was the end of him. He dropped dead. Like, that would be quite a powerful testimony for the early church as well, wouldn't it? Because if this man was coming to destroy them and God had killed him, it would really prove the credibility of the church. But he wasn't met with divine justice, he was met with divine grace. And that's so much what he needed, because nothing else would change a man like that. Nothing else can change someone who's got such a hard heart as such powerful grace. And I think it's just an incredible testimony to the grace of God, that it can turn a man who was going to destroy the church into someone who's probably maybe second only to Jesus in terms of the impact that they've had in the New Testament church. But isn't that good news for us too? Because how much do we need that grace? Even just for the last week of sinning that we've committed, never mind the lifetime of sins that we've committed. And it's this time when the ultimate light came into his life and flashed all around him, that Jesus appeared to him, that it revealed all the darkness in his life, and it shone light into the bad areas. And it must have been very painful for Saul, because he was a deeply religious man. He thought he was doing what God wanted. He genuinely didn't believe that Jesus was the Son of God, and that he was like a heretic, basically. But to discover that he was actually kicking against God must have been very painful, especially when Jesus says to him, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" He thought he was persecuting Christians. He thought he was just persecuting people, but he was actually persecuting God himself. And I think becoming a Christian can often be painful for people. You'll often have to give something up or change your lifestyle, certainly. But I think that's a hard point for Saul, to have discovered how wrong he was for such a zealous and religious man. And then down towards the end of this little account, we see Saul, a man on a new mission. So in verse 20, it says, "He went at once to preach in the synagogues that Jesus was the Son of God." And that's a radical transformation. While this account is sort of descriptive of how Saul's conversion went, it doesn't prescribe how every conversion should go. Many testimonies won't be this dramatic. Some might, but there'll not be many. Everyone, like I just said, should change when Christ comes into their life. They should all be on a new mission. We should all be living for something new. And I guess, a bit like what I said before, the people around us know that that's what we're living for. Do they all know that we're living for Christ? It shouldn't be a case of becoming a Christian and living a Christianity that fits around the same old lives that we already were living. A life that's just the same, but with a bit of a block booking on a Sunday morning for going to church. We should really be all sold out totally for God. That's the Christianity that Paul had when he had an encounter with the risen Jesus. And I think that's a really hard challenge, to be honest. I found that quite hard. Like, is my life totally for Jesus, or is it just at times, and then sometimes you go through the weekdays and it's not as much as it should be? Has your life been radically impacted by the grace of God? I know Josh asked me to look at Acts 9, he didn't just specify that bit. So there's also quite an interesting story towards the end of Acts 9 that's probably a bit less well known. I think quite a lot of people, if they've been in church for a little while, will have heard of the account of Saul's conversion. But if we go, I think we'll go down to verse 36 now, to this story of, I'll just read it in verse 36. "In Joppa there was a disciple named Tabitha. In Greek her name is Dorcas. She was always doing good and helping the poor. About that time she became sick and died, and her body was washed and placed in an upstairs room. Lydda was near Joppa. So when the disciples heard that Peter was in Lydda, they sent 2 men to him and urged him, 'Please come at once.' Peter went with them, and when he arrived, he was taken upstairs to the room. All the widows stood around him crying and showing him the robes and other clothing that Dorcas had made while she was still with them. Peter sent them out of the room. Then he got down on his knees and prayed. Turning towards the dead woman, he said, 'Tabitha, get up.' She opened her eyes, and seeing Peter, she sat up. He then took her by the hands and helped her to her feet. And he called for the believers, especially the widows, and presented her to them alive. This became known all over Joppa, and many people believed in the Lord. Peter stayed in Joppa for some time with a tanner named Simon. So this passage, I think, raises quite a few questions, really, probably more than it raises answers. Maybe we can, at other places in the Bible, we could get generic answers to some of the questions, but maybe I'll just raise some of the questions, and yeah, we'll see what we get to. But so the first one that we look at is, why did the Lord, in his sort of supreme knowledge and sovereignty, let Dorcas die? She seems like someone who's very useful to the church. It says that, verse 36, I think that she was always doing good and helping the poor. It seems like someone that would be very useful to the church, that. So why does the Lord let things like this happen? Well, as we see in verse 32, it says that so when she's sort of been raised back to life, it says this became known all over Joppa, and many people believed in the Lord. So you see, word of an event like this, it gets round, and it was used for the greater good and the advancement of God's kingdom. See, death, it's rarely a pleasant topic, but even with a very hard and unpleasant situation, God can still use them for good. So while there's a lot of questions from this story, I think that one lesson we can take from it is that God can redeem situations and use them for his good. The second question is, why did they want Peter to come? You might think that's obvious. They wanted him to come and raise her back to life. But I'm maybe not so sure if that's why. Well, I'm not sure if they actually had as much faith as we would assume, because it says that they urged him to come. If they were certain that he was going to raise her back to life, it doesn't matter if he comes that day, that week, or even that month probably. He could come at any time and raise her back to life. So I think it's equally as likely that they knew that there was that he was in the area and they could benefit from his sort of pastoral care at a difficult time. But I don't think we'll ever really know about that, and it is probably not too important, but it's interesting to think about these things, isn't it? And then the third question, it's more of a question for us. It's based on the life of Dorcas. So in verse 39, we see all these widows showing the clothes and robes and stuff that she'd made, And well, what a great tribute that is. They were stood there showing what she had done for them. Sort of a bit of a portfolio of her work, really. She didn't just speak the gospel, but she lived it, and she wasn't saved by these works, obviously, but they flowed out of her salvation, and that's how we ought to be too. Like we see with Paul, really, that his salvation, incredible works flowed from that once he was on a new mission, and it really changed the legacy of his life. But what will our legacy be? What will the line of widows that comes after you look like? What will they be showing off? What will you be remembered as? Will it be someone who beat them in a theological but pointless argument and turned them off from the gospel? Or, scared them away from the church with your legalism? Or is it going to be someone who helped to clothe them or support them or visit them in their hour of need? So, yeah, it's quite a varied chapter, this, really. But I think that one of the key themes, particularly is about grace, isn't it? So we're going to close with Amazing Grace this morning. It's some really good words in that song. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. And particularly, it could nearly be written about sort of that, couldn't it? He was blinded, but then he got his sight back, and yeah, I just thought it was a really good final song. So I'll just pray and then we'll sing that.